What if the stories we tell about climate change could actually make a difference? Not just in policy or activism, but in the way we see ourselves, our future, and the choices we make every day. Too often, climate storytelling relies on fear and guilt. But what if the real key to action is hope, creativity, and cultural connection? Hey, everybody. I'm Stephen Shower, and you're listening to Stories Sustain Us, the podcast that uncovers the personal journeys of those shaping a more sustainable world. Today, we're diving into the fascinating world of human-centered design, storytelling, and climate action with my guest, Bruno Olmedo Quiroga. Bruno's story is one of resilience, adaptability, and creative problem-solving. Growing up in Bolivia, his deep connection to nature shaped his worldview, and his transition to the U.S. introduced him to new challenges and opportunities. From navigating the culture shock of Miami public schools to shifting from a medical career path to engineering psychology, Bruno's journey has been anything but conventional. His work at IDEO allowed him to apply cognitive psychology to design, and today, as the Vice President of Strategy for Good Energy, he's on a mission to revolutionize climate storytelling. In this episode, we explore the challenges of balancing creativity with sustainability, the power of storytelling and climate action, and why hope isn't just a feeling, it's a responsibility. Bruno will also share insights on Good Energy's groundbreaking climate reality check, which evaluates the presence of climate themes in movies. You're going to want to stick around to learn how this year's Oscar-nominated film scored. But first, here's a bit more about Bruno. Bruno Olmedo Quiroga is a design researcher, storyteller, and strategist from Cochabamba, Bolivia. With a background in engineering psychology, he founded an educational technology startup, worked as a design lead at IDEO leading global research programs, and now helps shape climate narratives at Good Energy. Bruno has a talent for making the intangible tangible and for turning difficult conversations into engaging experiences. And he is at the forefront of reimagining how we talk about climate change. So, how do we craft movies and TV stories that inspire action rather than apathy? And what role does culture play in shaping the way we approach sustainability? Let's dive into this thought-provoking conversation with Bruno Olmedo Quiroga right here on Stories Sustain Us, where we are inspiring action through the power of storytelling. Bruno, good morning. Welcome to Stories Sustain Us. Thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to speaking with you.
Good morning, Stephen. Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, well, I definitely want to jump into the story of Good Energy. I was super excited when I came across your organization because what you do is kind of what this show is. It's about making sure we tell good stories about climate and sustainability because it's really powerful stories that move people into action, is more so than just data. So I definitely want to jump into everything about Good Energy, but first let's jump into your story. What's your story, Bruno? Where are you from, and how did you get to where you are?
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Cochabamba, Bolivia, and to a gigantic Latin family that was
Yeah,
super, close knit. I lived on the same street as like 16 of my cousins, and
nice.
we were like five houses next to each other to the point where when we would go visit each other, we wouldn't leave the house through the door to go to the other house. We just jumped the wall because
Yeah,
we were literally neighbors. And so that upbringing was wonderful because my family was so adventurous. We would always go into nature, into the Andes or into the Amazons,
nice.
um, to camp, to, you know, hang out by the rivers. And we had four-wheelers, like ATVs.
Yeah,
And we would go on like week-long camping trips, like leaving the cities. And the one rule was that we couldn't use paved roads unless strictly necessary,
it had to.
right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that was a whole social group that my family was part of. It was like 50 different four-wheelers with,
Wow.
one to two people on them,
Yeah,
some families, friends, etc., that would join for
it's a
these
giant
big
caravan.
caravan trips. Exactly, we call them
Yeah,
caravans. Um, and so I've always had a very, let's say, emotional relationship to nature, right? In an adventurous
I like that
sense.
choice of words. Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
because of that upbringing. And I think when I think of why I care about nature so much, it's I really attribute it to those experiences with my family and uh, in Bolivia.
Yeah. Well, what was your if you don't mind my asking, kind of what was your parents doing, and kind of, what was life like for you beyond these what sound like incredibly amazing adventures that I'm
Adventures.
already
Yeah.
envious about. But what was, your typical life like on a typical day when you weren't out on the ATVs in the
Yeah.
Andes?
Yeah. I mean, my dad was an entrepreneur. He started, or he ran a huge import-export company in
Okay.
Bolivia. He imported
Yeah.
everything from like leather to cars to Pepsi. Um, and my mom ran, there's these like internet cafes, right?
Yeah.
And like
Sure.
phone call cafes, and she had a bunch of them across the city.
Yeah.
And um, growing up with them as like business leaders, right, in their own way,
Yeah. Yeah.
also really wonderful because I think they taught me leadership from a young age just by the way that they were and led their own lives.
Yeah.
Um, and I went to an American school there. It was an American Christian evangelical school. My family was not practicing the religion, they were Catholic, but it was the only place to learn English in the city that I grew up in.
Sure.
Um, because of this like missionary group that came to Bolivia to spread the word.
Yeah.
Started a school there so that the missionary kids could have an American education, and then they would allow some Bolivian kids in, frankly, to offset the bills because I don't think the missionary kids were paying. It would allow
Probably
the
so.
Bolivian
Probably.
kids who could pay the bill enter, and a handful of us were in there. But I'm
Yeah.
so happy that that happened because, even though I don't practice evangelical Christianity, I'm grateful that I learned English.
Sure. Sure. There was a trade-off there.
Yeah, one could say so.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell me then, I guess, as you're growing up there in Bolivia, at what point did you start to extend into the States? Because I know we talked a little bit before the recording that you're in the Miami area right now. So
Mhm.
how did you start, your journey from Bolivia to the States?
Yeah, I mean, that's its own. We could do an entire podcast just about that story. Um, but I moved to Miami when I was 14 with my family. Long story
Okay.
short, because the government became socialist,
Mm-hmm.
and socialism does not get along well with entrepreneurship.
Entrepreneurs. Yeah, there was a
And
conflict. Okay.
so,
Yeah, I
um,
was wondering. I was wondering, putting those pieces together with when you shared what your family was doing, how that was gonna
yeah,
pan out
yeah,
with the change of political winds in Bolivia.
exactly. And in Bolivia, the legal system's different where you're guilty before proven innocent, right? And so I'm sure it's a political weapon that's been used many times before.
Sure, sure.
Is someone of a crime they
Sadly,
commit, imprison them, and you know,
yeah.
uh, leave them there for the 5-year period. That is the how long someone's allowed to be in prison with no evidence or trial in Bolivia.
Jeez Louise.
Um, and in those times, that political weapon got pointed at my family, right?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
And so we had to run away.
Yeah, sorry to hear that you had to leave your home country for those reasons.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely whiplash. I think for my parents, it was definitely hard, but I'll be
Yeah.
honest, like I was a 14-year-old queer Bolivian kid. Like I won. Like
Yeah,
sure, we lost financially. We were well
yeah,
off in Bolivia, and
yeah,
when we moved to Miami, I owned a suitcase full of tennis clothing because I was at tennis camp in Argentina when it all went down.
yeah.
Um,
Wow.
and we went from being a wealthy family in Bolivia to not really having anything here. But
Yeah.
at 14, it's like the United States is so full of opportunity, much more acceptance of queerness.
Sure.
So
Sure.
I think for me, um, it actually opened up the world rather than feeling like
Yeah.
a door closed.
Yeah. Well, it's I'm grateful to hear that and I hope for the rest of your family that has been their experience as well, that out of that tragedy, so to speak, or not even so to speak, I think out of reality, out of that ugliness, that something beautiful came in your life, and hopefully for your family as well. So, so you're 14 now, living in Miami. What in you've got some good English. I'm assuming your English you'd been learning that
My English
already.
was
So you,
great, actually, to the point
yeah,
that when I came, there's a lot of immigrants that come to Miami, and
yeah,
not all of
yeah,
them speak English well. And
yeah,
I remember going into middle school. It was halfway through eighth grade that I moved here,
yeah.
and um, they do like an English test, right? And the teacher that did the English test would like show me off around the the administration office, being like, "This kid speaks English perfectly, and he
Yeah,
just came from Bolivia, has never lived anywhere else before. Like I've never seen something like it."
yeah.
Um, because there's a lot of like Cubans, Venezuelans, Colombians that come here and don't speak any English,
Sure,
and
sure. Yeah, you
uh,
had that leg
like
up at that advantage. Yeah,
yeah, like ESL in high school and in school was just so big. Like so many
yeah,
students had to go through that program,
yeah,
English as a second language. But
yeah,
I thankfully was able to go straight to it, and it was a culture shock because going from a Christian private school in Bolivia to
yeah.
public school in Miami
Yeah, an evangelical Christian
is
school
yeah,
is that.
yeah, it
I
was
I grew up
crazy.
in South Texas, San Antonio, so I'm familiar with evangelical Christian schools. So
Yeah,
I can have some appreciation of that culture. So
no, definitely, and I'm telling you, like the um the culture shock of going into eighth grade where like people were partying. Like, I mean, it felt like Euphoria, like actually like the TV show
sure,
Euphoria,
sure,
but in eighth
sure.
grade
Yeah,
already,
yeah,
like
yeah,
the drugs people were taking to go to prom in eighth grade. I was like, this
yeah.
is crazy. Miami
Wow.
public schools are a different world.
Yeah,
But I found my place there. I found my people. This obviously it was a very chaotic time in my life
of
trying
course.
to make
Yeah,
sense of what was going on. And I just remember 14-year-old me being like, okay, Bruno, like you can't really control anything that's going on around you, but you can just like buckle up and do your best to be an incredible student and claw your own way out
yeah.
of this situation because again, for better or for worse, you're now in the country of
This is
opportunity,
where you are. Yeah,
right? Like
yeah.
much more than I had in Bolivia. And so that's what I did. I mean, I was set on being an amazing student. I engaged in a lot of extracurriculars, and um, that got me all the way through to college. I didn't even know what high school was when I moved here, actually. I
Sure.
remember in eighth grade, they were like, "What high school are you going to go to?" And I was like, I don't even know what high school is.
Yeah,
Like, I thought I was going to just graduate from this place. Like,
yeah. Like,
I don't know. But I did high school. I used to play tennis. I was a swimmer. Um, and one thing led to the next, and I ended up at Tufts University for college.
oh, right on. Yeah, nice. Do you have siblings? If you don't mind my asking, was there a transition for them as well, or was
Yeah,
it just you and your
I have a
parents?
brother. Yeah,
Yeah,
I have a brother. He was 9 years old at the time. He's 5 years younger than me.
yeah,
And so I think for him, he was young enough that at that point where you know, he kind of knew something was going on, but also was just along for the ride.
sure. More,
Uh,
yeah, more malleable taking it all in, just because.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
exactly. And
yeah.
so, and thankfully we had family here in Miami, so my
Okay,
uncle and
good.
aunt lived here, and that's why we ended up here.
That makes sense. I was gonna
Yeah.
actually ask that why Miami, but that I was assuming family, but I didn't want to make the wrong assumption. But yeah, that makes sense. So at Tufts University, then, what are you focusing on? What as far as thinking about moving forward in life and the things that we have to do in at college and university years besides have fun. What was it like for you there?
I loved it, honestly. I wouldn't
Yeah,
do it twice. Like
yeah,
college, I'm glad I did it. I'm gonna go back, but I
yeah,
really loved it. Um, Funny enough, I thought I was going to be a doctor. That's why I chose Tufts University
yeah,
because all through high school I was so set on bio and chemistry. I was in the IB program. I did all the right IB classes to accelerate my medical career. And at Tufts, you can start medical school 2 years earlier because they haven't, a medical school associated to it.
yeah,
And at the time, I was like, oh, the worst part about medical school is that it takes so long. So if I can just start earlier, it'll be great.
yeah,
I did 1 year of pre-med and I was like, the worst part of medical school is not that it takes too long, but it's a ton of work. Um, and after a year at Tufts, I realized that I didn't want to be a doctor anymore. I like on a whim, my sophomore year was just like, if I'm unhappy, like why am I gonna
Yeah.
lean into this and pursue bio, even if I'm good at it? So I dropped all my classes, didn't even tell my advisor, and just started picking up random ones. And one of those was engineering psychology, intro
Yeah.
to engineering psychology. And I had just read this book called Creative Confidence by David and Tom Kelly, the founders of IDEO, the design and innovation consulting firm,
Yeah.
and fell in love with it. Like the concept of human-centered design had just like blown my mind.
Yeah.
And engineering psychology felt close to that, right? Because to me, science was great, but almost too technical. Psychology was great, but almost too theoretical.
Yeah.
And engineering psychology is about applying cognitive psychology to design, to product
Nice.
design, to systems design, to make sure things are easier to use, they're culturally and contextually aware, um, and emotionally ergonomic per se.
Yeah.
Really
I
taking
like
into
that term,
account,
emotionally ergonomic.
yeah, taking
Yeah.
into account, what the cognitive capabilities of the
Yeah.
brain are,
Yeah.
and optimizing for those. And I loved it.
Yeah.
Like I thought it was the coolest class I'd ever taken, and ended up majoring in engineering psychology, um, at Tufts.
I'm absolutely fascinated. I told you before we started the recording, I wanted to learn more about engineering psychology because I hadn't actually heard that before, and
Yeah.
I am fascinated already and intrigued, and I'm going to do a deeper dive, after this because that's all of that is the kind of stuff that just grabs my attention. That how do we understand how our minds work and how the significance of our emotions and the importance that they play, that we should be listening to them and using them to help us make healthy choices, or it's not just
And to design things, right? That
right.
was the application of it. It was
That's the
like,
part that I
okay,
hadn't really thought about, but yeah, that
yeah, it's,
connection is like,
it's
oh
so much
yeah,
the brain can take. Why overwhelm it? You
right,
know,
right,
there's like a famous story of, I think it was in World War One, more pilots died of human error than actual war, because the cockpits were too complicated. Like they were designed by engineers, and we were trying to make humans learn how to figure it out. And then by World War II, people were like, what if we studied humans instead and then designed the cockpit
made this to
according
fit
to
them.
what human capability is, right?
Yeah,
Alarms, buttons, lights. How many things can you pay attention to at the same time? What's your emotional state when you're flying a plane in war?
yeah,
And so engineering psychology, human factors really emerged from that. And it
yeah.
has like its roots in war, funny enough.
Yeah,
And
a
then
lot does.
engineering psychology came from there. It's very true.
Yeah,
Um, and everything happens for a reason. Tufts was one of two universities in the country that offered that major, for undergraduates. So I ended up
yeah.
in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, well, your path, I'm seeing it unfold from your childhood in Bolivia, the adventures in the Andes, and your parents' entrepreneurial spirit, all intertwining into your foundation of who you are, and now this journey through university where you're, kind of latching on to this engineering psychology concept. I can just see kind of how your path is taking shape, even though you didn't maybe know that at the time. I mean, because how
Yeah.
do we know that at the time? But I can see your story emerging here, and it's lovely. I appreciate it. So what's next then? You're moving on through college, and you're going down this really fascinating road, and so where do you end up after college?
At IDEO,
Yeah, perfect.
when I read that book, Creative Confidence, and I just remember being like, I'm going to work here. Like,
Perfect.
that's my goal. And so I ended up getting a fellowship, an internship in between my sophomore and junior year of college, um, as part of the IDEO collab, which was IDEO's very first exploration into blockchain as an emerging technology.
Okay.
Before I mean, like, I think the literally only two websites that existed regarding crypto was Bitcoin.com and blockchain.com. Like, there was
Yeah.
nothing else. There were no apps, no Coinbase. Ethereum didn't even exist at the time. Um, but we were looking at this emerging technology from the lens of, okay, imagining into the future, projecting into the future, what is the potential that it has, and how can we take a human-centered lens to start solving real problems, even though there's not even any infrastructure in it yet.
Yeah.
Uh, and I loved it. I mean, it was incredible. I've always had a passion for emerging technology, and I got to apply cognitive psychology to it, right, with a
Yeah.
multidisciplinary team at the Harvard Innovation Lab. I came back in that winter, but for a different fellowship. Um, this time it was about food and the innovation of food systems in collaboration with Target and the MIT Media Lab.
Okay.
And the project that I worked on that winter, because it was like a 3-week winter fellowship, um, got a lot of traction. So they asked if I would stay through the semester. So I took the semester off. I didn't tell my family that I took the semester off because I knew they were going to say no. Um, and worked, with MIT, with Target, with IDEO through the summer, started an educational technology company that was all about bringing food and nature into classrooms.
Oh, right on.
We actually got curriculum in Boston public schools and Minneapolis public schools. I worked there through the summer, and uh, then Target. No, actually, then I was gonna take one more year off to keep working on the startup. But I remember my boss saying, "Look, you're 1 year away from graduating from college. Like, if you don't do it now, you're not
Yeah.
gonna finish. And
Yeah.
so go finish college, or you're not hired again." And so I was like, "Okay."
Good advice.
Um,
Yeah.
Great advice.
Yeah.
Yeah, great advice. At the time, I was annoyed by it,
Sure.
but looking back, I'm so glad
Yeah.
that my boss took that position.
Yeah.
Um, and especially because the company ended up shutting down. Not because it was doing poorly, it was actually growing, but it's the risk of starting a company in an innovation lab. It was owned by Target. Target shut down a lot of its innovation
Yeah.
arm
Yeah.
because as soon as the economy kind of struggles a little bit,
Yeah.
first thing that goes is innovation. And
Sure.
so since they technically still owned the IP over the company before it fully became its own thing, it just got shut down
Yeah.
with it.
Yeah.
But I ended up joining IDEO full time after that instead of running the company. But now in the core consulting business. And so I was there for 4.5 more years, doing research and design projects all over the world, working
Yeah.
on the medical space, working with governments, working in insurance, working with tech companies, um, creating products, services, programs, organizational strategies. Really, every project was totally different. And I got to live all over the world. I was in Munich, I was in Montreal, Dubai,
Nice.
Mozambique, New York. So, it, again, I really loved the experience at
Yeah.
IDEO as well. It
Sounds
was really
wonderful.
fun.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sounds like an incredible opportunity for a young professional to get that experience traveling the world and working on all these different, different ideas, bringing in so much more into your own landscape, into your own perspective on things. I mean, what an opportunity.
definitely.
Yeah. So 4 years then at IDEO brings us up to where are we getting close to the
Yeah,
good energy, or is there something else
we are
between here? Okay.
actually.
Yeah.
So, I was at IDEO, I think a total of 6.5 years, including college,
Yeah.
my college time. And while I was at IDEO, I started asking a lot of questions around human-centered design and the limitations that it had when we're also considering planetary needs
Yeah.
and societal needs, right? From both a DEIJ perspective and a climate perspective, because human-centered design aims to make something really easy to use, really desirable. I would say, I mean, it saved so many lives. IDEO invented the diabetes pen, right, as a result
Mm.
of the design thinking and human-centered
Yeah. I
design
was going to ask for
process.
an example to help the audience understand what human,
Yeah,
centered
so
design
that
is.
story is
So
actually crazy.
yeah.
There was a woman, because before the diabetes pen, you had to like inject with an actual syringe, right? The
Yeah.
insulin.
Yeah.
And the research team, because the whole process of human-centered design and design thinking is that you first start by deeply understanding people's needs, their actual human needs and their lives. And it's like human anthropology applied to design. And that was my craft. It was going out and talking to people and, visiting them in their home or in their workplace, observing how they live, how they work, and asking a lot of questions about that specific thing we were talking about.
Yeah.
Diabetes pen, I mean, I didn't work on this project. It was invented before my time, but um, there was a woman who shared a story about how she was on a date and she went to the bathroom and came back and the date was gone. And she looks at her phone and there was a text being like, I can't believe like you're a drug user, and wouldn't say
Oh,
that to me.
wow.
Wouldn't tell
Yeah.
me ahead of time and just kind of like disappeared. And she
Yeah.
was mortified, and it's because he looked through her purse and saw the syringes and thought that she was a drug
Yeah.
user, right?
Also,
And so
probably a good reason not to stick with that person who's looking through your purse, though.
yeah. I mean, I think ultimately a red flag.
Right.
She
Right.
dodged the bullet.
Yeah. But
Uh,
still,
uh,
led to something better.
yeah. And so that story obviously led to the insight that, hey, maybe we need some more subtle, not just
Yeah.
easier to use, but subtle and
Yeah.
um, even personalizable tools for diabetes treatment,
Yeah.
so that if it isn't a purse, it looks like a pen. Like
Yeah.
you won't distinguish it from anything else. Um, and that you can choose what color it is also to add some personality to it, and it blew up, right? It did incredibly.
Yeah.
And so that's what human-centered design is about. However, when you're designing something that's really amazing for one person, one individual, this process doesn't necessarily take into account the negative impact of things, right? So an example that I like to give is like Keurig cups. So
Yeah.
the Keurig machine coffee
Yeah.
makes it super easy to make coffee, easier than ever before, right? I'm gonna withhold my opinions on the actual flavor of coffee, but
It makes coffee.
it makes coffee. It makes it really easy,
Yeah.
and then you can see that model of really disposable cartridges applied all over the world, right?
Across
In
everything.
a lot
Yeah.
of
The
different
single use things. Yeah.
areas, right? You have it in medical devices, you have it in printers, you have it in Keurig cups.
Yeah.
And so even though you're making this thing that makes things much easier to use and much more commercially successful, there's not like a closed loop to then consider, okay, when we do
Right.
this times a million, um, at what point do we consider this bad innovation?
Right.
Because even if it's for a medical product that's saving someone's life today, is it contributing to cost us our future or
Down the
future
road.
lives? And
Right.
even worse if it's not even saving someone's life. There's no moral kind of
Right.
like balance to put it on, which I know is an oversimplification, but those are the kinds of
But it's
questions I
an
started
important.
asking,
Yeah. No, that's an
right?
important thing to bring up. That and thank you for doing that, to show that there is this bigger picture that you're looking at. It's not just about making things more convenient for an individual, but it's also thinking larger beyond that single use individual as well. So I appreciate that context around
Exactly.
your work.
And so I started leading the charge around the responsible innovation portfolio, right? And trying to see how do we make design thinking and human-centered design a more responsible practice without limiting its boundless creativity, right?
Yeah.
Um, and that process broke my heart, to be completely honest.
Yeah.
Like, truth is that under this system and culture that we're in, if you can't justify something commercially, it's really difficult for it to actually happen. I kept entering meetings with people in and outside of the company, right? Potential clients or leaders in the company that would say, this is great, but it's going to make things more expensive if
Yeah.
we're doing this small change to be more sustainable. Um, and one big aha moment in my career was working for a celebrity beauty brand. Um, and I remember we made this whole presentation on how they should use glass packaging for their products because they're more eco-friendly and recyclable, and we could even more easily do a reusable situation in the future.
Yeah.
And they said no. They were like, this is going to be too expensive. It adds to the cost of the product. There's going to be more product loss in the supply chain because glass is more sensitive. Shipping is more expensive because it's heavier. And so it was an absolute no. And then it created a weird relationship between us and the clients because I think now they felt judged that we weren't
Sure.
like, that they didn't want to spend a little more of their money on making things eco-friendly, but they're starting a new beauty brand, right? Like they have to kind of be smart about their money as well. I totally understand.
Yeah.
1 week later, we find a paper, like a research study, talking about the trend of glassification, which is the general trend in beauty products embracing more glass packaging
Yeah.
because they're perceived as premium. And so
Yeah.
people are willing to pay
Higher value.
more for
Yeah.
something that comes in glass, even if it's the same formula,
Yeah.
right? And they wanted to be a premium brand. And so we didn't even make a presentation. We just sent them the study and we were like, hey, like forget everything we said last week. This is actually the reason why you should
Yeah.
do
You're
glass.
going to
We
make
want
more
it
money if you
premium.
do it this way.
People
Right.
perceive it as premium. Plastic is going to be perceived as cheaper. And they were like, great, let's do all glass. Like, not even a big conversation around it. And so something clicked there for me, right? That like innovating responsibly has to be within the current of commercial viability and commercial potential.
Yeah.
And the second thing that clicked for me was financial value follows our cultural values, right? And if our cultural values are going to keep prioritizing profit over the planet, so will financial values.
Yeah.
Because that first week we tried to use the planet as the argument, did not work. And when we used commerce as the argument, it did work. And so it became really clear to me what it is that we're culturally valuing more, and therefore what business values, because I think business is more a reflection, like a financial reflection of what we culturally appreciate and
Sure.
value.
Sure.
And so that's when Good Energy came into the mix. An alum of IDEO, was working with Anna Jane Joyner, the founder of Good Energy, on the playbook, the
Yeah.
very first playbook, and before really Good Energy announced itself to the world. And they asked if I was interested in doing a project with them to do the foundational research and strategy for what should be in that playbook that then became the organization. And I said, yeah, of course. And I fell in love with the work, to be honest. It
Yeah.
was like 4 years ago. And I did the research for the playbook, left. They came back to do the research to shape the actual organization, right? The services and
Yeah.
structure and whatnot, as well as a strategy to do that. And after that project, they were kind of like, why don't you just stay? And I was like, I would love to stay. And so I've been a fractional leader at Good Energy since, right? It's not my full-time position, but
Yeah.
I've been involved ever since.
Fantastic. Let me. I wanted something that you were just sharing. I want to go back to for just a second, and then we'll jump into Good Energy. Then I think we're at a good transition point here. But what I think I heard you describe in a short time ago, in that kind of relationship between doing something for the planet versus doing something for profit, and then your background in human systems and what actually is best for the user of whatever this product may be. What I'm seeing in my head, or the story I'm telling myself about kind of where your work is beginning to align, is in that kind of triple bottom line sweet spot of trying to find what's best for the person, what's best for the planet, and what's best for profit. Putting those pieces together is what we're trying then to do. If we're all focused on profit, we're going to hurt the people and hurt the planet. If we're all focused on the planet, well, people might not want it, and the folks with the financial backing are certainly not going to do it. And so all these pieces kind of need to fit together and find that sweet spot of that kind of Venn diagram, if you will, of where people, planet, and profit align. That's kind of what I heard you describing. And did I imagine that, or is that kind of where you're ending up now?
No, that makes a lot of sense. And as I move forward in my career, I think that sweet spot is something that I continue to explore in different ways. And also, working at Good Energy is about making that sweet spot bigger, right?
Yeah.
Because I don't know if you're familiar with the PACE layering framework from the Long Now Foundation, but that's been a North Star in my career in terms of thinking about how to do the work that I do and shape my theory of change.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about that.
essentially it talks about change over time. And Long Now focuses on long-term decision making in a world that's stuck in really short-term decision making loops. And they have this framework that has layers in it, right? So the layers go fashion, commerce, infrastructure, governance, culture, and nature. Um, and so the deeper you go into this framework, the slower changes to happen, right?
Mm,
So at fashion, change
sure.
comes and
Fast
goes.
fashion. Yeah. Yeah.
Trends. At commerce, change happens a little slower than in fashion, but then it also goes away like faster than when you make an infrastructural change.
Sure.
Same with governance, right? Governance will take a little longer to change, but then stays longer than when you make an infrastructural change. And then culture is below governance, meaning that changing something at the cultural level takes a really long time
Time.
compared to these other ones, but
Yeah.
that change remains for longer once you've actually created a change in culture. And more importantly, once you change something at a deeper level, it moves the layers above it with
It
it.
influences everything out. Yeah.
Think about it with governance, right?
Yeah.
Policy
Sure.
passes, infrastructure, commerce, and fashion all change.
All makes sense. Yeah.
Culture changes, right? Let's say with the acceptance of LGBTQ plus rights,
Yeah.
and then governance has to react to that and change. But if the general culture in the United States hadn't accepted at least gay people, trans people, of course,
Yeah. Still struggles
right
going
now,
on.
not really, but
Yeah. Yeah.
at least gay
Absolutely.
people, the Marriage Equality Act wouldn't have happened.
Right.
And there's so much evidence that points to shows like Will and Grace and Modern Family and Schitt's Creek increasing acceptance across the world
Yeah.
for gay people. And so I want I entered this work applying that framework and thinking to the climate lens, right?
Perfect.
If we change the culture, then governance will hopefully react to that, and then business will react to that
Yeah.
as well.
Those
So
dominoes
that
start
I
to
don't
fall.
keep finding myself in this conversation where I'm trying to convince someone that caring for the planet is worth their money.
It's good business, right? Right.
It's like a heartbreaking conversation, and I'm gonna have it too many times, and people are gonna keep having it unless we change something at a
Change the
deeper
culture.
level.
Love that.
And so
Yeah.
that's why I'm at Good Energy.
Yeah. So good energy then. Great Transition is an organization that supports television and movies, the writers, the script writers, um, helping them to, speak correctly or write correctly, more accurately, about climate change and climate crisis, as I understand it. So what is good energy? I shouldn't be telling the story. You should be telling the story. What is good energy?
Yeah, Good Energy is an organization that helps make climate change as easy and engaging as possible to write about. And so writers may want to reflect our climate reality better, because we know from research that we've commissioned that climate change has been completely absent from fictional TV and film. Our focus is in fictional TV and film.
Sure.
Um, Largely because it was too political, right? I remember doing a research interview earlier in the Good Energy process, and a writer told me, yeah, I mean, he's like a very senior writer now, but he's like,
Yeah.
when I was first getting started, especially people would say, okay, in the writer's room, we don't write about abortion and we don't write about climate change. They're too
Yeah.
political.
You
Like
want to
it
get
was
your
at that level of politicized.
yeah.
And
Wow.
so what we are aiming to do is helping writers increase how often they talk about climate change now that that's changed, right? Because while climate change feels politicized, it's no longer divisive. Most people actually do believe
Yeah.
that climate change is happening and they're worried about it across the political spectrum.
Yeah. Yeah.
I believe
It's
Yale's latest
hard to
research
escape
shows
it.
that 73% of Americans are now worried about climate change.
Yeah.
And so uh, we, of course, are focused on getting that reality reflected, but also we support writers who want to write creative and weird and different stories about climate change looking into the future, expanding what those stories are beyond the apocalypse.
Yeah.
Because the only climate stories, again, tended to be apocalyptical, and that's not apocalyptic, and that's not the most inspiring future to imagine or work
Right.
towards,
Right.
right?
Right.
Um, and so that's also what we do. It's not just about reflecting the reality of today, but about creating more expansive stories around what our futures could be.
Could be. I love that. So there's a variety of services then that you offer. Tell us about that. What are so how do you do that? How do you help writers incorporate these storylines into their visions and the fantasy worlds that they're creating?
Of course. We offer consulting services, right? So everything from script reviews to writers' room visits to research reports, world building reports, where we help, create the world of your story with a climate perspective in it. Um, we also do more foundational research. Sometimes, we've had production studios come to us and say, hey, we want to write about climate change, don't really know where to start, but we want to do a very foundational projects so that we can use that report, hand it over to our writers, and use it as inspiration before the idea even exists. Um, and other times they do just bring us in for like a gut check on whether they got the facts right or not, right? The script's
Yeah.
already ready and they just want to make sure they got it right. We also offer workshops to train writers um, and executives and showrunners. We host events like salons for high level writers who are interested in talking to each other and perhaps collaborating on new films, new shows, new stories. And we also have open source tools and services, really tools like the playbook, the climate reality check. And I'm working on a new one now that we talk about the next time you interview me.
Yeah. Nice.
Um, and we also do a lot of research, right? Academic research through our narrative change R&D lab to understand what the current narratives around climate change are today and how often they're showing up. And we continue updating our frequency analysis every year of is this trend going up, right? Is climate
Yeah.
change actually showing up more often? And the answer is it is.
Yeah. Good. So you mentioned the climate reality check.
Mhm.
That this recording's happening the weekend before the Oscars. The big, we're all going to be, at least a bunch of us will be watching TV on Sunday to see how that show goes down, and you're just getting some press around your annual climate reality check. So what is that? First of all, this is the second year I believe you've done it, and so tell us kind of what that is, and then tell us if you can kind of what this year's report showed.
Yeah, of course. So the climate reality check is a two-part test that measures the presence of climate change in stories. And so the two parts of the test are number one, climate change exists, and number two, a character knows it. It's inspired by the Bechdel test, which, for the listeners who aren't familiar, is a test that measures the representation of women in stories.
Hmm.
And so to pass the Bechdel test, there's three steps. Actually, there have to be at least two women with names who talk to each other, number two, and then number three, about something that's not men. And unfortunately, tons of stories do
That
not pass
doesn't
this.
happen. Yeah.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
women were often being written as like accessories to men into
Sure.
stories and
Yeah.
very
They were
one-dimensionally.
props to the story.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But since this test was created and gained popularity, the dimensionality of female characters and relationships between female characters in TV and film completely evolved, completely changed.
Yeah.
And
Nice.
so the climate reality check takes inspiration from that to do the same for climate change, but really just for climate presence. We didn't want to dictate what the story should be about. We just
Sure.
wanted to be more present and more
Just acknowledge
central.
that it's there, that it's a thing.
Exactly.
Right. Right. Right.
And so we developed this test after interviewing over 100 writers, showrunners, media experts, climate experts, etc., um, because we wanted to make sure that this was a tool that was creatively generative, easy for writers to use, academically measurable, so that academics could also use it to measure TV and film, um, and easy to remember. right? Like if you
Yeah.
make it too complex, people aren't going to remember it, they're not going to use it.
Right.
Um, and so it's, I believe, the first tool that both writers and media experts can use to be in this space of the intersection of media and academics and climate.
Yeah.
And we've been applying it to the Oscars and we also applied it to the 250 most popular films of the past decade in a different research study. Um, but this year for the Oscars, uh, one film passed the climate reality check, only one.
Yeah.
Um, and it was The Wild Robot, which is an incredible, incredible animated film. I mean, it's a work of art.
Yeah.
Um, there were 10 films that were eligible to pass the climate reality check. So what I mean by eligible is that, we're not assessing historical films where it doesn't make sense for climate change to
Sure.
show up.
Sure.
We're not
That makes
assessing
sense.
high fantasy or sci-fi where it also doesn't make any sense. So films like Dune that are climate allegories, let's
Yeah.
say,
Yeah.
don't qualify, but of course, really appreciate that that kind of storytelling is still in the sphere, in the
Still
space.
influential. Right. Right.
Exactly.
Right.
But yeah, this year of the 10 films, it was The Wild Robot
Yeah.
that took the crown and did so incredibly. I'm not sure if you've seen the film.
I want to thank Melissa, who helped us organize this interview. I want to give her some credit here. So thank you, Melissa. She was kind enough to share with me the news release before it was sent out to the public a few days ago. And seeing then, what you just shared, that The Wild Robot was the only film. I hadn't seen it yet. And as soon as she sent me that news release, I was like, "Oh, I'm curious. I gotta see this." And my wife and I watched it. It is a fantastic film. I couldn't agree more with your assessment. It is, yeah, it's a kids movie, of course, but it's way beyond that. And I mean, it's just such a great story, and it's beautifully done. And yeah, I don't know that I would have watched that film had I not seen your report, and it
Mm,
grabbed my attention because it's like, I don't know, we don't have children, and the animation films might not be top of our uh, evening watch list on a weekend, but because of this report, I was like, I got to check this out, and was not disappointed. In fact, quite the opposite. I was thoroughly impressed and enjoyed it. It was such a great film. So I'm cheering for it this Sunday. Hope it
yeah,
pulls some
we are as
wins.
well.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's next then for the organization? Like what you're it's I think you're a new organization, relatively, still kind of adolescent years of your influence in the Hollywood space and the TV streaming space. So obviously, I'm cheering for y'all. TVs and movies are so culturally influencing, as you talked about, kind of bringing women's rights into our culture, normalizing LGBTQ issues. There's such a power behind the media that we absorb and the entertainment that we absorb. So that's why what you're doing, I think, is so important to start to try to move that needle, not you know beat you with a hammer over it, but just make sure the storytelling is including these important themes. So what's next for you? Because what you're doing is so, I think, culturally and critically important for moving all of us into better understanding of climate change and some of the actions that we can do to slow it down and or reverse it.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, the we're the short answer is we're going to keep making climate stories easier to write about so that we get more of them, right? We're
Yeah.
already seeing a growing trend. Every year, the number of climate stories being written grows. Of course, this year's at the Oscars, only one film passes the climate reality check, but as I mentioned, you have films like Dune or Flow or Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes that
Yeah.
have deep climate themes in them. There were other films like Twisters, right, that didn't get nominated for Oscars but came out this past year that are embedding these themes in there.
Yeah.
And what's brilliant about it is that climate change isn't the plot. right? It's not the story. Climate change is just the world that they live in, and similar to the world that we live in today.
Right.
And so, however it is that we do it, by supporting stories directly, by shaping the story of the landscape itself, right, through media and research that we put out into the world, we want to continue increasing the creativity with which climate change is being portrayed on screen. Because the more people talk about climate change, the more likely we are to change
Yeah.
ourselves, our society, our future. And people talk about TV a lot. People talk about film a lot.
Yeah.
Um, and so far, Good Energy has been focused a lot on the breadth of climate change and trying to get it into every story and just expand it beyond the apocalypse. Now we're going to start focusing on more targeted narratives that we believe are going to be more high impact in terms of not shaping people's behavior, right? But just the realities being reflected of the climate crisis under specific topics will be more motivating in terms of creating change. For example, at the intersection of health and climate change,
Yeah.
or the intersection of migration and climate change. My dream is to do a whole work stream around fossil fuels and climate change, but we haven't yet gotten that
Getting
one
there.
funded.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but the fossil fuel industry has been playing a role in Hollywood since 1934, where
Sure.
Shell has an in-house film production unit where they've been making movies and investing in movies that, make the consumption of fossil fuels normalized and
Yeah.
almost position it as an essential part of society. And I think that we're now the counter attack
Yeah.
to
It's
that.
a
We're the
powerful
different
narrative to
kind of
to
narrative
change.
has been put out into the world. Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I'm very excited for what's to come. I'm excited for the next climate reality check report next year. Um, and I think, Good Energy is in a great pivot moment where we have established this industry, this practice of Hollywood even considering talking about climate change more openly.
Yeah.
Um, and now it's like, okay, what do we do next? What do we do with this now that we've created it?
Yeah. Well, what you're doing, I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Catherine Hayhoe, kind of a globally
Yeah, she's one of
recognized.
our advisors. She's amazing.
Perfect, because I was like, this, you're doing what she says we should do. And she's an inspiration for me. And this show is that, one of the most important, if not the most important things we can do about climate change is to talk about it and to embed it into our stories that we're consuming on a daily basis, on our streaming services, or slowly getting back into the theaters and watching movies in that experience, embedding that story into our daily observations will help normalize it and help bring it to the forefront. So that's brilliant work. There's a line I pulled from your website that I just love this line. It says, storytelling takes courage, and so does facing the climate crisis. And that's what you guys are doing. And I think it is courageous work, and it's important work, and I'm really grateful for it. Is there anything else about Good Energy that we haven't talked about yet, that I haven't asked you about, that you want to make sure you're getting out to the audience before we kind of transition? I want to make sure I'm being respectful of your time here. So, but before we kind of wrap up this fascinating conversation, what have we missed? What still needs to be said about Good Energy?
Well, I think that, you know, we deeply believe that telling more stories about climate change and telling your story as it pertains to climate change is so important. Really looking at your life, you've already been impacted by the climate crisis in so many ways, from the price of food to hotter summers to, you know, even natural disasters in some cases.
Yeah.
And these stories move people. These stories move our hearts and our minds much more than data does. And so, of course, we work with TV and film writers, but we encourage everyone to talk about climate change more openly, more often, because even though it can be kind of depressing topics sometimes.
Sure, sure.
It's so important for us to acknowledge that it's happening and acknowledge that we are in an era where it's up to us to create that change,
Yeah,
and create a future that is a gift to future generations rather than a debt to them. Um, and so, as you navigate your life, your days, I encourage people to notice how often climate change is being mentioned around them, and to add to that momentum as well. And do it in creative ways too, like challenge yourself to tell the story in a comedic way, challenge yourself to think about it as a rom-com or whatnot. I mean, again, to a personal story, I
yeah,
remember an example I often give is that when I lived in Boston for Tufts, when I was studied at Tufts,
yeah.
I hated how cold it was. Like, I'm Latino, I'm hot-blooded, like, hated how
Yeah.
cold it was. I did not like the winters. People said it would get easier with time every year, and it only got worse and worse and worse. And so the winters did get warmer over time, right?
Yeah.
Generally. And I remember kind of just like secretly loving that the snow was coming later, like in the year. And there was less black ice everywhere because my freshman year I broke my laptop because I slipped on black
Slipped.
ice. There's like
Yikes. Yeah.
personal vendetta on it. And then I feel kind of guilty about it because I'm like, oh, it's not really a good reason that this is happening,
Right.
but also I kind of enjoy it, you
Yeah.
know? And I think that complexity, the emotional complexity of climate change and how we're experiencing it is very real, and um, no one's morally perfect around this.
Sure. Right.
I think every day we are forced to make decisions that maybe act against our best interest, and you
Right.
can start feeling guilty about the climate crisis. But that's also something super important that we put out into the world.
Yeah.
It's, guilt, shame, and fear are actually really terrible ways to
To
motivate
deal with,
people
yeah,
around the climate
absolutely. There's
crisis.
some
Terrible.
incredible research around that already. Brene Brown and all her
Exactly.
work and everything that yeah,
It's paralyzing. It doesn't
yeah,
move people into action,
yeah,
whereas hope or even anger
yeah.
can be much more motivating and
Anger's
motivating.
an action emotion. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's something that I would love to leave everyone with, right? Like
Yeah.
next time you find yourself feeling guilty or feeling like shaming someone else, because of a climate thing,
Yeah.
um, stop for a moment and acknowledge that actually it's the system's fault.
Yeah.
And we are personally empowered to change the system, but we are not at fault as individuals. It's like this system that we've created for hundreds of years that we didn't think was going to lead to climate collapse, most likely, right? Like,
Right.
I don't think that 7 generations ago, when we were in the first and second industrial revolutions, those people were thinking to themselves, wow, I cannot wait for the climate to collapse as a
Right.
result of this
We're gonna
industrialization.
destroy future generations.
Right?
Right.
No, they
Exactly.
probably thought, wow, we're going to expand education, we're going to expand healthcare, we're going
Yeah.
to, evolve business and government and trade. Um, and so their hopes are what we now have in our hands.
Yeah.
However frail, however brittle, we're receiving those hopes, and it's up to us to breathe air back into them, and make the best of what we have and make the most of what we can so that future generations can enjoy a better planet.
Absolutely. I greatly appreciate that messaging around, shame and guilt and, perfectionism that's not what we need right now. We need everybody just doing their little part. Even if
Yeah.
it's, none of us are going to do this perfectly. But everybody just doing their little piece as best as they can collectively, then will start moving us the right direction. So rather than being paralyzed by this idea of like, if I can't do it perfectly, I'm not going to do it at all, or I'm going to feel, awful about myself because I didn't do it perfectly. That's not helpful. So
Totally.
appreciate your
Yeah.
message around that. That's super important to get out. So, well, let me ask you, Bruno, as we're getting here close to the end here. You just delivered this great message. Is there any other call to action? Is there anything else that you would like folks to do now that they've heard this story? How can they support your work at Good Energy, or what else do you want them to do in their day-to-day lives?
Yeah, well, first of all, you should follow us on Instagram, at Good Energy Story, to stay up to date with all the work that we're doing. Our website is goodenergystories.com. Um, and really, the best way to support us and this is to talk about it, right? If you're working on a story, use our resources. Even if you didn't think it was going to be about climate change, there is always a way to embed climate change into any story because it's ever present. It transcends every topic. Um, and we're even seeing people in the private industry start using our resources
Nice.
for climate storytelling from an advertising perspective. And I've had a few conversations there. So this these learnings that we have in Hollywood and storytelling apply to everything, and it can apply to policy making, it can apply to uh, advertising and product design and product messaging. It can apply to how influencers talk about the stories they write, and so um, that would be my call to action.
Perfect. Well, I will make sure to put the website and the Instagram information on the show notes so folks can get in touch with you and follow you and use those resources. So that's wonderful.
Great, yeah. And if you want to follow my personal Instagram, it's Bruno Olmedo Q, where I also post the work that I do for Good Energy and other organizations.
Perfect. Well, I'll get that on the show notes as well. Um, so the last thing we then do, Bruno, is we talk about hope. Um, you know, hard conversations around climate change and the climate crisis, and there is fear associated with this, and anxiety and worry that climate anxiety is a thing, and that can be also difficult to move people into action when they're so worried about the future or they're overwhelmed by it. Oh, overwhelm is an emotion that just shuts you down. You can't really do anything when you're overwhelmed. Um, so despite the challenges and the difficulties, we're about a month away from Los Angeles and the terrible fires that were there, climate influenced issues. I mean, this stuff is real. It's happening, and it's hard and it's difficult, but we need hope. And hope, as I'm imagine you're well aware, is not an emotion. It's not a pink cloud kind of thing. It's not defined as emotion. It's more of a mental state. It's this idea of, for those who study it, you can have a vision for a better future. There's steps you can take or plan of action you can take, and you have a sense of agency that there's something you can do about it. You might not get there, might fail, might be difficult. And in my perspective, you can't do it by yourself, whatever your future is that you're aiming for, because we need community, we need collaboration. But hope is this idea of a better future that you think you can get to, and you feel that you have some sense of agency to get there. So I want to ask you three quick questions about hope, your hope for a better future, and would encourage you not to think too much about it. Just kind of give the answer as I ask you the question. So the first question for you, Bruno, is what is your vision for a better future? It can be for you personally, professionally, or for the world. What's your vision for a better future?
My vision for a better future is one where we learn to live in more harmony with nature and each other. Honestly, I think right now there isn't so much harmony between us and nature and between us and us.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and so I think that if and when we're able to harmonize this out of tune life that it sometimes feels that we're living, um, the future will be better.
So second question then, tell me why. Why is harmony so important to a better future?
Oh, great question. I think that when I think of harmony, it's when things are flowing well with each other, right? For something to feel harmonious, each little piece has to be playing its part, knowing what's going on around it, for it to all work together and work well. And if something or a lot of things kind of like become disharmonious or choose a different path or get too loud, too noisy, too sharp, too aggressive, too hot, it it throws things off, right? Um, and I think maybe these days the harmony has gotten a little too loud, a little too intense, a little too hot, in so many different ways, um, that it's not feeling like harmony anymore. That hope and harmony is not really coming together.
Yeah.
And harmony also takes effort, right? Harmony
Yeah.
doesn't just happen. It takes work. Like hope, as you said, is not just this like feeling of like a child hoping to get saved from this big monster. No, hope is like a fire. It's intense, and it takes a lot of work and cultivation. It's a garden to be shared
Yeah.
and tended to together. It's not an inheritance. It's something that we've received and that it is our responsibility to pass forward.
Nice. So the last question then for you, Bruno, since we're storytellers, imagine a future, tell yourself a quick story, that harmonious future exists today. We're living in what you just described. It's no longer a future, maybe we'll get there. It's no, we're living in that right now today. How does that make you feel?
Makes me feel joy and peace, and like I can think a little more long term about society than I think I'm able to some days lately.
Perfect. Well, Bruno, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure getting to know you and to speak with you.
Likewise, Stephen.
Really encourage you to keep doing all the great stuff that you're doing. We need it. The world needs folks like you doing this hard work, because it is work. It is hard work some days. So thank you for all your efforts to make the world a better place. So wish you all the best into the future.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you for having me here. I hope you have an amazing rest of your day.
Thanks. Take care.
Bye.
What an incredible conversation with Bruno Olmedo Quiroga. His journey from Bolivia to the U.S., his pivot from medicine to engineering psychology, and his passion for human-centered design all led him to his amazing work at Good Energy, where he's transforming the way climate stories are told. Bruno reminded us that storytelling isn't just about raising awareness. It's about shaping culture, shifting mindsets, and inspiring real action. He also highlighted the importance of balancing creativity with sustainability and how responsible innovation must align with commercial viability. And of course, his insights on the climate reality check were eye-opening. Only one film passed the test this year. That tells us there's a long way to go, but also a huge opportunity to bring climate narratives into mainstream media in ways that truly resonate. Look, it's easy to underestimate the power of pop culture, but think about it. How many of us have been influenced by a movie, a TV show, or even a single line of dialogue? Stories shape how we see the world and what we believe is possible. That's why the work being done by Bruno and the Good Energy team is so important. If we can infuse authentic, engaging climate storytelling into entertainment, we can help shift not just individual behavior, but entire cultural narratives. And that's how real change happens. So I want to thank Bruno for sharing his journey, his wisdom, and his commitment to making climate storytelling more impactful. Bruno's work is inspiring to me, and I'm so grateful for the role he plays in shaping a more hopeful and action-driven narrative for our future. And to you, the audience, Bruno's story is a call to action. If you're a storyteller, and let's face it, we are all storytellers, think about how you can integrate climate themes into your work and conversations with others in a way that sparks curiosity and engagement. If you're an educator, for example, bring climate discussions into your classroom in ways that connect with your students' everyday lives. As a community member, support organizations that are pushing for sustainable solutions in media, business, and policy. And if you're simply someone who loves movies and TVs, like I am, start looking for and supporting content that gets climate storytelling right. Your choices really do matter. So, with that, I also want to say thank you for being here today and supporting Stories Sustain Us. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your family and friends, follow the show, and leave me a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And be sure to join me for the next episode of Stories Sustain Us, dropping on March 18th. I'll be speaking with an inspiring guest about the Bear River Massacre and the incredible efforts to reclaim and restore the site, not just for conservation, but to honor and preserve the history of the Shoshone tribe. This is a powerful conversation about environmental restoration, indigenous resilience, and why remembering our past is essential to shaping a better future. Don't miss it. Episode 34 drops March 18th. You can find it at storiessustainus.com, watch it on YouTube, or listen wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for being part of this journey with me. Keep telling stories, keep taking action, and please keep making the world a better place. Until next time, I'm Stephen Schauer. Please take care of yourself and each other. Take care.